Welcome to Generation Hope, a podcast by connect.faith. I'm Callie Bronkema, and this season we're focusing around the theme of identity. I'll be having conversations with a wide variety of young adults with the goal of building empathy and understanding between communities. So today I'm talking with Paige Bach, who is the Director of Next Generation Ministries at Providence Presbyterian in Fairfax, Virginia. So thanks for talking with me today, Paige.
Thanks for having me, Callie. I'm excited.
Yay! All right, let's just start. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
So I'm Paige, and like you said, Callie, I'm the Director of Next Generation Ministries at Providence Presbyterian Church. I've been in this area for about 2-ish years. Actually, May was my 2-year mark of being in this area, so that's very exciting. I came to this area from seminary, where I was part of the program CYMT, which is Center for Youth Ministry and Training, and it is a graduate program for people who want to be in youth ministry. So I worked part-time in a church and part-time doing seminary over 3 years, and it's the best thing that ever happened to me. He gave me my fiance, gave me infinite amounts of knowledge on youth ministry and the skills to continue to adapt and work in the church. And before that, I grew up in Florida and went to undergrad for youth ministry as well. So I'm kind of all into the church. Grew up in the church, knew I wanted to never leave youth ministry. And so I went to college for that and then went to seminary for that. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. Yeah. I am fully immersed in the youth men world.
Awesome. So I mentioned earlier, to this season, we're kind of focusing on the theme of identity. So what are some of the things that make up your identity? And we talked about in our last episode, there's primary identity and secondary identity. So things that how the world sees you versus how you see you. So just what are some of those things that make up who you are?
Things that make up, this is the easiest but also hardest question. I'm sure that everyone says that. My identity, I am a cat lover. I have a one-eyed cat named President Abraham Lincoln, but he goes by Pal. And I take a lot of my identity of being his mom. Love him so much. I am what I have dubbed a forever fiance. I was supposed to get married in October of 2020, and we're still engaged because of COVID. So just forever engaged. I happen to be engaged to a woman, which is not the most interesting thing about me, but some people think it is. Let's see, what else is my identity? I'm adopted, and I feel like that has shaped a large part of who I am. I've always known I was adopted, so that has played a huge part in my identity. I don't know, what the correct term for this is. When your spouse dies, you're a widow. I don't, know what it's called when, your parent dies, but, my mom died when I was 22, and so, that's a large part of my identity is, grief and, normalizing grief is a big part of who I am, and things I'm passionate about, talking about death and making it not something that we avoid. I am a summer camp lover and a youth ministry connoisseur. I am a pastor's wife in a sense, because my fiance also is in youth ministry. So I not only do it for myself at my church, but then I go to her church and I fill this role of the partner of the youth minister. And so that's a different part of my identity. Those are some pieces of who I am.
Yeah, a lot going on there. Yeah. A lot making up who you are.
Yeah, maybe that was too much.
Sorry. That was awesome. Because you only get to see so much of somebody. So I love seeing what's going on, under the surface. So you mentioned CYMT, best thing that ever happened to you, education standpoint, but you also mentioned it's where you met your fiance, Diane. and now you guys are basically a power couple within the church, running.
Yes, I love that. Yes, power couple.
Yes, running two youth ministries. Well, you're doing children and youth ministries at neighboring churches, and it's no. I think a lot of people will be coming in listening to this podcast and might be a little confused if they don't know much about the history of the Presbyterian Church, of different Protestant churches, and might hear, an LGBT person working within a church. How does that work? So what has your experience been being a queer youth director? Sorry, I should ask, is queer an okay term for you? I know people have preferences.
Queer is, probably the best term for me. I honestly, I am engaged to a woman. I'm going to marry a woman. But, I have always identified more as, pansexual. Sometimes I feel like taking on the queer identity is, not even really, fair for me to do because, I'm very straight presenting and, I have not ever faced any really, real oppression as a queer person. I just happened to fall in love with a woman, and so queer is fine. That is honestly the best term because I am marrying a woman, but I also I don't super deeply identify with that as a part of who I am.
Just a quick note that it's okay to stumble like I just did, and make sure that you're using the identifiers that the person you're talking with is most comfortable using. And also a quick definition for you. Pansexuality is defined as anyone attracted to people of all genders or sexes, or regardless of sex or gender.
So like I said, I grew up in the Methodist Church, and the Methodist Church is not affirming at this time. There's a lot of, if anyone who's in the church circle knows, the Methodist Church is having a really hard time trying to figure out where they stand on the LGBT community. The Methodist Church is a global church, so they have congregations in large portions of Africa, in parts of the Philippines and such, and so that has really it's great for the diversity of the United Methodist Church, but it also really, that's a lot of perspectives and a lot of ways of life that have to come together and make decisions on these tough topics. And so I grew up in the Methodist Church, and I never, I said, I don't really super identify with the queer. I was never am I gay? Is it wrong? One, I always thought it was okay to be gay. I don't know who did it right, whether it was my parents or my church, even though my church is in a conservative area, but they were God loves everyone, and maybe they didn't really mean that, but I heard that, and I have always believed God loves everyone, and love is love, and nothing you can do can separate you from the love of God. And so I never had an issue with the gay thing ever. And then when I met Diane and we started dating, I was it was a non-issue for me because I've always been affirming. I was actually a pretty aggressive ally in the affirming way because I couldn't stand that people were not kind to the LGBT community. Anyway, so I grew up in the Methodist Church, not affirming, went to seminary, started dating a woman, was serving in a Methodist church and stayed closeted there per some guidance in my church, which probably was not the most legal thing or kind thing to do, but it all worked out in the end. And I still have really great relationships with my church, even though I wasn't out when I was there. Now I serve in the Presbyterian Church because I knew that I could get a job there and be affirmed. The Presbyterian Church that I work at, it's a great church. They're not enthusiastic in their support of the LGBT community, but they did hire me, and they knew I was very open in my interviews that I was moving here to at the time live with my girlfriend, and nobody there has ever had a problem with it to my face. I don't know if anyone's ever had a problem with it behind closed doors. But when Diane comes to participate in things, she's welcome and people know. So I'm serving in a church that I feel supports me pretty well. Obviously I wish they were a little more enthusiastic in their support for the community, just because I know that there are queer kids in my youth group, and those kids deserve to know, like, they need to know, like, absolutely, you are welcome. And, like, I think I'm a pretty good representation of that, but, like, when you're young and you're struggling with maybe your identity, like, the more explicit a community can be, the better.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, when you were growing up, somebody told you God loves everyone. So making sure that these kids know that too is important.
Yeah. Diane and I were having this conversation recently about the fact that, like, the church needs to move, like, beyond being, like, it's okay to be gay, and, like, needs to move to a place where, like, they celebrate people's queerness. Like, it's, like, a gift. And, like, personally, for me and my fiance, like, we don't want our main identity to be that we're queer. Like, we really just like being normal people. But there are, like, it shouldn't just be something people are okay with. They should, like, love that that's a piece of you, whether how loudly or proudly you want that celebrated or not. Like, we need to move beyond just the church being okay with queer people. We need the church to, like, see that as, like, a gift, like a blessing, a different characteristic of themselves that, like, the church can celebrate and can use in a way that they haven't in the past.
Yeah. Yeah. Because the history is so fraught and divisive. And this is true with so many different communities, where if a community has not been treated fairly or justly in the past, it's not enough to just be like, oops, sorry, but, like, we're cool now, right? Like, there should be some reconciling with that, and looking at how to move forward in a way, like you said, this is a piece of you. And so God says to love all of everybody. So figuring out how to do that in a way that celebrates it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
The Presbyterian Church USA, or PCUSA, is supportive of the LGBT community. In 2010, the governing body of the church voted to allow the ordination of openly LGBTQ ministers at the discretion of each individual church. In 2014, they voted to allow pastors to use their discretion to conduct same-sex marriage ceremonies, and in 2018, they voted to affirm the church's commitment to the full inclusion of people with all gender identities to worship and serve within the church. Because these policies are permissive instead of mandatory, the experience someone might have at each individual PCUSA church may differ, but on the whole, the church is largely inclusive. The United Methodist Church has policies that are strongly against the LGBT community. However, many individual churches are affirming and welcome LGBT members to their church. In 2019, the vote to uphold the policies against the LGBT community were upheld by 53% of the vote, with 47% arguing for more inclusive and affirming policies.
So, you mentioned something before, too, that I feel like might resonate with some people. You mentioned, because I'm straight presenting, essentially, that I don't want to put words in your mouth, but what I got from it was you don't necessarily feel like it's your place to take on, like, the queer identity. I was just thinking that I feel like that would resonate with a lot of people, because there is, like, a mold that what we've seen from what the media has told us, every representation that we've seen of the LGBT community. If somebody just thinks of a lesbian, they're probably thinking of a butch presenting person. Like a gay man, they're probably thinking of a very flamboyant, very feminine gay man. So I think what you said was really important, in that not everybody fits that mold. And the community is wider than that.
I was a really good ally before I was in a relationship with a woman, and I have always, like, thought of sexuality as, like, a pretty fluid thing. I think, like, we're naive to think that people are, like, gay or straight. Like, it's pretty fluid, and like I'm sure there are some people who are all the way straight and some people who are all the way gay. For the most part, I think we all fall on this like spectrum. And I've always just like known like, well, if I fell in love with a woman, that would be fine. Like I use the term pansexual a lot for myself because I'm like, it's really more about the person than like their gender identity, how they present.
Yeah.
And so like I have always known those things about me. Then I met Diane and I was like, wow, I really like this person. I'm like attracted to them and like I just think they're the best. And then I felt like I had to use some sort of like true identity, and so that's like I use queer, but I present very, very feminine, and I like love to talk about cute boys, and like we're not really pride people. Like I think pride is a great thing, but that's like not really for us because like we don't think of our sexuality as like a huge part of who we are. We just think of ourselves as like Paige and Diane, a couple.
Yeah.
Well, Diane does present more androgynous. She wears a lot of pants and like button down shirts, and she has her hair cut really short, and it's not as easy for her to blend in as it is for me. Like I don't have to tell people that I'm queer like at first to like disclose something to like make me feel safe.
Yeah.
Like I can just be like me and like forget about that piece of my identity sometimes. Although now that like I'm engaged, like it's a lot harder because like Diane is a huge part of my life. But I definitely have I benefit from looking straight, whatever that is supposed to mean. And that's kind of just like crap, honestly, like that we choose people, like say people look straight or people look gay. But sometimes I feel like I benefit from a lot of this like straight privilege, and so I can't like speak to like the trials and tribulations of being a queer person in the same way, because personally my time being with Diane, like I think maybe one person as we were leaving a concert said like one nasty thing to us, and like besides that like we've never together been like persecuted for our sexuality, and so it's just not a piece of who I am or like trauma that I've dealt with.
Yeah. Which is a good thing. I'm very glad for that.
Yeah,
but
I recognize that it is a privilege, and that, like, I don't have, like, I have it much easier than a lot of people. And, like, living in Northern Virginia, like, the main reason we live here, Diane works at a very progressive Presbyterian church that, like, in their bulletin every week says, like, they affirm the identities of queer people, and, like, that's a big part of who they are. So she got that job first, and like we moved here because this was a safe place for us to live, and like we've never felt any type of like singling out or persecution like living in this area, whereas we moved from like Nashville, Tennessee area, and like it wouldn't necessarily have been as easy to remain there and be a queer couple.
Yeah. So kind of facing that choice of where can we go that we know we can just live and be Paige and Diane.
Yeah, and that's, like, hard because, like, we loved living in Nashville. Like, I loved my church, and, like, I kind of wish that I could have stayed in my church in some capacity because I'd been there 3 years and made great relationships and would have loved to continue to build them. But I knew, like, in the grand scheme of things, like, this area is much safer. And so, like, that's really important to us that we feel safe and, like, accepted and just, like, a normal part of the community.
Yeah. Well, and part of that, like you said, is that you're a lot more than your sexuality. So let's talk about some of those other pieces.
Yeah.
I really liked the term that you used. I wrote it down. You said that you're a big advocate of making death not something that we avoid. How did you get to that? It sounds like really healthy place in your relationship with a very hard thing, which is death and your mom's passing.
Yeah, so like I said, I was 22 when my mom died, and my mom was like sick my whole life. She had like congestive heart failure, she had cancer, she had been hit by a drunk driver. Like, love my mom so much, but she had like the worst cards dealt to her when it came to like her health. And so part of the reason I'm adopted is because my mom had ovarian cancer, and so like she couldn't have kids. And so my whole life I dealt with her being sick and a lot of fear, like she was gonna die. Like she would go through swings where like, I mean, I now know this is not normal, but like she would go to like 2 and 3 doctor's appointments a week, like my whole life. And like, I just thought that was normal. And now I realize like I go to the doctor like twice a year. Like people do not live their whole life at like 12 different specialists. But I was always really wrapped up in this, like, she is sick. What is going to be the thing that like takes her necessarily? Like I lived with a lot of this like fear. Honestly, it's a fear of abandonment, which probably comes a little bit from being adopted and a little bit from having a sick mom who like she could have passed away at any time. And the older I got, the sicker she was. And when I went to college, we had she passed away like my very 3 months into me being in seminary. So I just graduated college. I backpacked Europe for 2 months per her like forcing me. She's like, go, like it's like it was always my dream. And so I went. I guess while I was gone, her health was not great at all. When I came back, she helped me move to Tennessee, and then she just kept getting sicker and sicker. And eventually she was like put in hospice care in the hospital. She was like too sick to be moved to the facility, like a hospice care house. And so I flew back from Tennessee because my mom like was a big advocate, and like her never getting in the way of like my dreams and the things I was called to do. Like she really pushed me to do seminary and like to move away. Like she was like, I'll be fine. My mom never planned on dying. Like she was like totally like going to persevere any health challenges that gave her. Like she would talk about being at my wedding and like seeing her grandchildren, and dying was not on my mom's agenda. So when I got like the call that like I probably should come home, like she was on hospice, like I knew she'd been really sick. I'd been home like a month earlier. And she like was home but not well, and then like she got back in the hospital. Then I was called to come back, and I made it to Florida, and she passed away like a few hours later. And I was like in like the hospice room with her, like in her bed with her, laying with her, and she passed away. And I had to call all of her siblings and like tell her. I called her like best friends and told them. And like I'm 22 years old, like living on my own for like the first time ever, and I had to like do these really hard things. And normally I do not get emotional about this, honestly.
Take your time.
But I did all of the things that like real adults do, and I I was the point of contact for everything. And so I called her siblings and told them, and I called her friends and told them. And it was really hard, but I just like I had it in my like that I could like do this and I could handle it. And like my parents had been separated, but like my dad was still a part of like our lives, and so my dad like was there, and I didn't want him to handle it. I was like, this is my job. And so anyway, so she passed away, and I was in Florida for a few more weeks, and then I like came back to seminary. And part of CYMT is like these weekly soul tending groups. We get together and like we share about the troubles in ministry, and we share about like we do some classwork together, but a big part of it is soul tending, and like that's just caring for each other. And I came back, and like it was my turn to share, and I'm like, so my mom died. I'm doing pretty good. Like besides the fact that my mom died, like I'm doing pretty good. And like I swear after like that session, they all stayed behind and like chatted, and they're like, Paige is not okay. Like she's like she's saying everything's fine, even though her mom just died and she's 22 years old and like an only child and living away from home for the first time. And they really rallied behind me. I went to counseling. They like just were a really good community for me. And I was able to process my grief in some very healthy and some very unhealthy ways, like with the people in CYMT and my soul tending group. And because of that, I like came to this like realization that like we don't talk about death enough. We don't like prepare ourselves for death enough. Because it happened like so early on in my time in seminary, I felt like it was a piece of my identity. Like there were multiple people in COMT who had also lost their moms. So we had this like dead moms club, and like we could all relate to each other. And I realized like people don't talk about death. People don't like process it well. And we especially like don't prepare like children and teenagers for like the fact that this is a part of life. Like it's always this like horrible grieving experience, but we don't talk about it a lot beforehand to like prepare people. And like, it's one of the few things in life that's guaranteed is that people will die.
Yeah.
And so I like just have tried to normalize that conversation and like talking about it, and the fact that like, yeah, my mom died when I was 22 and it really sucks and like it's really hard for me, but like it's a piece of life, and I think that I can do, like, I can help more people by talking about it and like processing my grief, and like sometimes getting emotional about it like shows people just how normal it is, as opposed to just something we talk about when it happens.
Right. That was, yeah. And what really struck me was you said, like, death is one of the few things in life that's guaranteed. But we spend so much time avoiding it because you don't want to actually face the fact that that is guaranteed.
Right. I was on a mission trip once with some kids. They were Diane's students, and so they didn't know me super well. And I mentioned that my mom was dead, and one of the kids was like, no, don't say that. Say she's passed away. Like, saying she's dead is so, like, harsh. And I was like, one, it's my story, so, like, I can say whatever I want to, but I'm like, there isn't anything, like, comfortable about death. Like,
Right.
I don't want to say passed away. Like, she's dead. She has died. And, like, normalizing using some of that language as opposed to just, like, passed away and kind of, like, it passes away in your thoughts. Like, you don't really think about it. Like, my mom is dead. And, like, that was how I chose to talk about it. And I don't know if it had a profound impact on those students or not, but it had a profound impact on myself of being able to articulate, like, why I say, like, she's dead, and I don't normally say, like, she passed away. Like, I'm not trying to make people comfortable in these conversations. I'm trying to be real and, like, normalize, like, how severe it is.
Yeah. And you said you're trying to do that to help others, but have you seen it help you, too, in processing your mom's death?
Yeah. I think talking about it, like, is just... I, like, wish it wasn't a large part of, like, who I am and my personality, but it is, like, really freaking love my mom. And, like, she was just, like, she never got to meet Diane. Diane never, like, got to meet her. We weren't together when she passed away or died. And so there are milestones in my life where, like, I really wish she was there. And so I found that, like, I don't really, like, apologize for when I, like, get overcome by grief, because I'm like, this is, like, I'm feeling these things, and, like, it doesn't just go away. Like, not that, like, anyone's ever ready for their mom to pass away, but I think, like, when you yourself are a grandparent and you lose your mom, like, you know that it's probably coming, and, like, you know that's, like, kind of a phase of life that maybe you're closer to, as opposed to myself, who was so young when my mom died. Like, I wasn't ready for, like, I still needed my mom. Like, I didn't know how to do so many things that I would have, like, reached out to her for. Right. And so I allow myself to live into that grief still. Most of the time I'm okay, but, like, I always bring it up. I always, like, make a point to, like, remember my mom in that way, and, like, honor her life by, like, still grieving. Like, I'm not better. Like, I'm never going to be okay with the fact that she died, but I can talk about it and remember her, and, like, that helps me a lot to, like, continue to live into grief.
Yeah. And what you're kind of getting at, too, is the larger topic of mental health, and making sure that people know that their feelings are valid. And what we have to get to is a point of what you're feeling is valid. Let's come up with some coping mechanisms, or, like, exactly what you just said. Your way of honoring her life is admitting how much this all sucks and talking about it.
So when my mom died, and, like, I came back and went to soul tending and was like, yeah, everything's fine. My mom's dead, but everything's fine. They rallied to, like, take care of me, but, like, I didn't immediately go to counseling. There were a couple of months where I was, like, just a part of my soul tending group, and, like, they kind of acted maybe as counselors in my life in a sense. But I was displaying a lot of destructive behavior because I was like, everything is fine. And so, like, I was partying a lot because I was trying to have fun and find joy and not grieve. And I had a little incident where I partied very hard at a CYMT function, and everyone got to see.
Oh, no.
And for me, that was like a breaking point. It was like around when my birthday was. And so, like, I think that was probably a large part of it. Like, my mom wasn't going to be there to celebrate my birthday. Like, and I acted in a way that I probably shouldn't have. I know now, like, I'm not ashamed of it because I was grieving and I just, like, was young and I didn't know what was happening.
Yeah.
But after that incident, I was like, man, I really need to, like, get some help. And so at the same time, like, what the associate director of my program called me and was like, Paige, I think we need to have a chat. And, like, in this chat, like, we mutually agreed that I should go to counseling. And, like, my graduate program, like I said, is the best. And they paid for me to go to 6 sessions of counseling. The church I was serving was like, we'll pay for 6 more. And so I went, like, once every other week or something for quite some time. And it really, really helped me. Besides the fact that I was, like, kind of acting out in some ways, I also was dealing with, like, a lot of, like, physical illness. Like, I was sick all the time. My stomach always hurt and I just felt horrible. And so I was going to all these doctor's appointments and, like, they were like, nothing's wrong. Well, it was how I was, like, internalizing my grief and my, like, depression and anxiety from the whole situation. I physically make myself sick. And, like, now I know that, and when I feel sick a lot of the time, I know that, like, where's your mental health at, Paige? Like,
Right.
What do you need to deal with? But by going to counseling, like, all of that went away, like, pretty much instantly, because I was, like, learning coping mechanisms and how to, like, grieve appropriately. And, like, it really just changed my life. And, like, to the point where I still know what, like, my triggers are and what my coping mechanisms are. And, like, those 12 sessions of counseling really helped me be a good minister now and, like, be just a well-rounded person, because I know how to use those skills that I learned in counseling. It totally, I would never have said, like, I'd say my life in that, like, the quality of my life is significantly better because I went to counseling. I wouldn't have been able to continue to be a youth pastor if I hadn't dealt with my own problems and my own grief. And now, like, I can articulate my grief a lot better, and I know, like, when it's just a bad day or whether, like, it's a bad life. And that's, like, something I contemplate a lot. Like, you're just having a bad day. It is not a bad life.
Yeah. So I feel like so many people are afraid to actually ask for that help, and are, for some reason, and everybody has their own reason, it becomes a shameful thing to recognize, like, I'm not okay, and I need someone to help me get to the point where, like you said, you can recognize bad day or bad life, and how do I get there?
Yeah, I never dealt with, like, problems. Like, I never thought counseling or therapy was, like, a shameful thing. I just didn't think that I needed it. I thought, like, I really did. Like, when I went, I was like, I'm okay. Like, I made those hard conversations after she died, like, call all of her, like, her siblings and her friends. Like, I thought I was okay because I was there and, like, saw her die, and, like, I don't know. I just, like, didn't think that I had trauma or, like, I just didn't think I had trauma from the situation. I thought that I was okay.
Yeah.
And so I was like, why would I go to counseling? Like, I'm fine. Like, I know what happened. It sucks. Like, I would have articulated that I knew that it sucked. But what I didn't realize is, like, it wasn't something that, like, you could just get over. And so once I was dealing with some, like, destructive behaviors, I was like, this is not me. Like, this is not who I am. Like, I'm a really, like, I don't want to say I'm, like, a good person, but, like, I was a pretty goody kid.
Person.
Like, I'm not somebody who's gonna, like, party all the time and be, like, I don't know, disrespectful or, like,
You didn't recognize yourself.
Irresponsible. Like, I didn't recognize myself. And so I was like, I need to go to counseling to, like, figure this out. So for me, it was not like I have to get over the shame of, like, counseling. Like, I've always thought it was a good thing. I've always encouraged my friends to go. Like, I've always been like, if I needed it, I would go. But I didn't realize I needed it. I didn't think that, like, it was right for my situation, but it totally was. My life did a 180 from that situation. And, like, I mean, even after just, like, one session of counseling, of, like, having somebody to talk to about the things that I was dealing with, like, I was already doing better than I had been before that first session.
Yeah. That's awesome. I think that somebody once said, like, therapy and counseling also does not have to be reactive. It is 100% a preventative thing, because if, like you said, you learned your triggers, you learned your coping mechanisms, those are things that every single person could benefit from knowing about themselves. Yeah, something that should be more accessible and affordable, and
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it is a real shame that, like, mental health is not thought of as, like, just overall health and, like, included. Like, I know a lot of people can't afford it because it is really expensive, because it is, somebody has to be highly trained to be good at what they're doing. And I wish that it was more accessible, and I wish that there was less of a stigma about it, because I really do think it's, like, the best thing. It's just something that, like, I have continued to advocate for, like, people who I love, and, like, my youth, and, like, talking to their parents when, like, parents come to me about things. I'm like, yeah, I can talk to your youth about it, but, like, they might also benefit from a counselor. And just trying to, just like me being a presence in my students' life as, like, a queer person is, like, a good representation for them. I think, like, talking about therapy, counseling, mental health, like, is another just way of being a good example for them to look to.
If you're listening to this podcast and you want to explore some affordable therapy options, there are some sites that can help you. There's sites like BetterHelp, Talkspace, Open Path Collective, and these aren't sponsors, but just some options that we want to make sure you know about.
A lot of what you've talked about with me today are about ways that you have seen things change, ways that you think things could continue to change. So what gives you hope right now?
That is a powerhouse question. What gives me hope? Well, I think I would start by saying, so my name actually is Paige Danielle Hope Bach. My middle name is Hope, and I have always really clung to that, that my middle name is Hope, and, like, hope is a part of, like, who I am. And so what brings me hope? A lot of things bring me hope. I'm in this part of my life right now where I'm discerning, like, what are my next steps? I feel like I think that I'm going to go back to school to be ordained. I feel as though I am a pastor, and I feel like I went to seminary, but my program did not, like, you have to have an MDiv, obviously, to be ordained in the Presbyterian Church and in the Methodist Church. And so my degree, while it's, like, part of the way there, it is not all the way to be qualified to be or an ordained pastor.
An MDiv is a Master's of Divinity, which is the first step of the process in becoming ordained in a church.
And so I'm realizing that, like, that does matter a lot to me, that I want to be an ordained pastor, because I feel like I am a pastor, and I want the recognition from, like, a denomination, and I want, like, the recognition from, like, the process where other people say, yes, you are a pastor, like, you should be ordained. And so it's really scary, but it also brings me a lot of hope, because I'm realizing that I really love what I do, and I want to be the best version of myself. And I think that it would be a real blessing to myself and others for me to be an ordained pastor. I think we need more representation of people who are queer, and maybe queer people who don't fit the mold of what people necessarily think is queer. I think we need more women pastors. I think we need more pastors who, like, say, like, yes, I'm a pastor, but my calling is to youth and children. And so this, like, discernment process that I'm in has given me a lot of hope. I used to think it was really scary, like, going back to school, but I'm really excited at the prospect. So that definitely brings me a lot of hope. And then I would just say, the, like, stage of life that I'm in right now, being engaged, being, like, not having kids, like, being able to just kind of be young and enjoy my life with my fiance, like, that brings me a lot of hope that, like, we have the freedom to do that, and that we can travel, that we can like just experience life together. It's honestly the biggest blessing in my life, and so I think that brings me a lot of hope.
Yeah, especially now that the pandemic is slowing down and we've gotten our vaccines, can really start traveling and exploring and doing the things that we've waited a year and a half to really do.
Yeah, absolutely. Plan a wedding.
Right. So, my last question for you is, what do you hope for? And you can take this on any scale that you want. It can be on a personal level. It can be for the church. It can be for the country. It can be for the world. But what do you hope for?
I think I'll kind of answer on multiple fronts. Like for myself, like I hope for clarity in my life and peace at like where I am and like where my future may be.
Yeah.
I hope for like a happy and healthy marriage for myself and Diane whenever that so happens. For the church, I hope that it continues to open its doors and let more people in and be more and more diverse. For the world, I hope that people could realize we have far more in common than we have that's different, which really trickles down into like church and my personal life as well. Like, I really hope that we can get to a place where we realize that like we are all God's children and all made in God's image, and that means that like everyone is loved and cherished and like accepted for who they are, and that we would have better tolerance for that. And not even just tolerance. Like I don't want just tolerance. I want acceptance. I hope for acceptance for all people in all areas of their life.
Yeah. And I think you're doing your part to build one little community at a time where kids can come and know that they are all of those things. They are affirmed, they are loved, and thank you for doing that work.
Yeah, I hope that is what is happening. I hope that is what they are experiencing as well.
Yeah, I'm sure they are. Yeah, thank you so much for talking with me today.
Absolutely. It's been fun. It's nice to this happens a lot at work. Like we get into like the nitty-gritty details and like we don't get to talk about the things that like bring us passion or like joy. Like we're just so into like doing our jobs that even though we love them, like we don't talk about the things that really matter to us. So it's nice to set time apart and just get to chat about things that I care about, things that make me who I am, and things that like you hope to share with others.
Yeah. Yeah, somebody once said it's a good debrief session of just like me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So this has been Generation Hope, a podcast by connect.faith. Thanks for listening.